And I think that there's a stupidity to the five that is inviting. They have sections, like they'll do 3 news stories, usually the A block, the B block, the C block. And then sometimes they'll do a 4th, and then they go into just completely stupid stuff where they'll be like, they have a section called The Fastest, and where it's just 2 quick stories. Sometimes it's only 1, or sometimes it's 3, whatever. And there'll be stuff like emojis at work. Huh? Let's talk about emojis. Yeah. Let's talk about junk drawers. Let's talk about haircuts. You know, and you're like, shut up. And I'm sitting here going, stop it. I hate my life.
Hello and welcome to the Aaron Rupar Show. Longtime followers of my work probably are aware that I've spent many, many years now watching Fox News. I got into that back in the fall of 2017 when I happened to see an interview of John Kelly, who was at that time the White House Chief of Staff, on Laura Ingraham's show. And this was, of course, just following the Charlottesville demonstrations and Trump endorsing the white supremacists who were protesting in Charlottesville. And John Kelly was on Laura Ingraham's show defending the honor of Confederate generals and saying that they fought for heritage, not slavery. I posted this clip. It went super viral, and right away it opened my eyes to the appetite that people had to kind of understand what was going on Fox. And that's obviously important because Fox and the Republican Party have a ton of overlap these days. And on today's podcast, I'm really excited to talk to Juliet Jeske, who, like myself, has been immersed in Fox for a long time. Juliet is the author of the Decoding Fox News newsletter. So each week she goes deep on a number of Fox News shows and then puts together a newsletter kind of debunking misinformation, talking about topics that get heavy play on Fox programming, and just generally helping mostly people who are center or left understand what's going on Fox. But as you'll hear during our interview, we also talk about people who watch Fox in earnest, who Juliet has reached with her work and kind of opening their eyes to the amount of BS that occurs on Fox on a daily basis. So I think you'll enjoy our conversation. Before we get to it, I just want to remind you that if this is your first time listening, or if you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, please do that wherever you get your podcasts. I also post the footage of each of these on YouTube, so please subscribe to my YouTube page. And wherever you can, if you have opportunities to either spread the word about the podcast or leave positive reviews, please do that as well. I'm dropping this episode on a Tuesday because I'm taking a mini vacation Wednesday through Friday, but I'll be back to the normal schedule next week of recording on Wednesdays and publishing them later that evening. So look for the next Aaron Rupar Show, which will feature Thor Benson in 8 days' time. So without further ado, let's get to the interview with Juliet. Welcome to the Aaron Rupar Show, and I'm very happy today to be joined by Juliet Jeske, the author of Decoding Fox News. Juliet, do you consider yourself mainly an author, publisher? What title do you use to describe your role?
I call myself the manager of a media project.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I suppose. Because you have a little bit of grant funding as well. So maybe it's more of a project at this point. Maybe that's a good place to start. Is Decoding Fox News, do you see that being kind of your long-term thing, or are you viewing this as something you're doing for now and maybe branch off into other interests later?
It sort of turned into a long-term thing. It was meant to be, originally they thought they were only going to give me a grant for 6 months and just see where it went. And thankfully they decided to go for a full year. And that was great because it didn't really kick in. The audience didn't really sort of happen until it was about 6 months in. And then it kept growing. But I love working in the disinformation, misinformation realm and debunking conspiracy theories and
yeah, and you're really good at it. And
thank you.
Before I forget, everybody should check out Julia's work at Decoding Fox News on Substack. I believe probably just Googling Decoding Fox News will probably take people to your site, but correct me if I'm wrong, or if there's special instructions for how people access your work. But I've definitely noticed your tweets getting more and more circulation, and Juliet's really good, as she just mentioned, at debunking misinformation and kind of putting Fox into context, which is, something I also aspire to do. But Juliet's work, is very produced in the sense that you put together videos that have a lot of context within them, and you almost never present anything from Fox out of context. It's always kind of with a fact check or a debunk, and so I think that's really useful work. And I think maybe a good question to start with is just why you decided on Fox News as your focus. Was right-wing media something that you were interested in before delving into this project, or did you have other reasons? Maybe this was part of your grant project that they wanted some research done on Fox.
I'll try to make this as short as possible, but I sort of accidentally start researching the Proud Boys before anybody but the press that was already dedicated to extremism knew who the Proud Boys were. And I stumbled on them because I knew somebody who got radicalized. I didn't know this person that well. But I don't even want to gender this person, but they started showing up on Gavin McGinnis' show. The Gavin McGinnis show, which is like an online streaming show. I started capturing it because I was horrified by what I was seeing. And I eventually started working with journalists. I also worked with the FBI briefly, but I didn't really do much. They didn't really do much with anything I gave them. And I was like, well, they don't seem to care that this guy keeps inciting violence and he's starting this group and he's incentivizing violence. And like, seriously, you don't care? Okay, well, I started working with journalists and I would just give them free coverage of the Gavin McGinnis show, and nobody else was watching it. It was 407 episodes. I ended up capturing all 407 of them. That took serious time.
What year was this?
That was started in 2016. I started following him basically as he was putting the group together in real time. And I didn't capture the episodes in order. They're all out of order because I was just I made a spreadsheet. That's why the spreadsheet's my logo of every single episode. And then I strategically went after guests based on the time I had rather than trying to go through, episode 1 through 407. I was like, no, I got to get the guests. So Milo and like Richard Spencer and like all these people.
That's a name from the past. Milo.
Yeah, Milo. And so basically what happened when I'd already done that, and there's a whole crazy story with that, which I won't waste time with, but crazy story where I had cops in my apartment and they thought I was part of the group and all this stuff. And I was like, no,
wow.
Yeah, it's too long of a story. But anyway, it changed my life. I decided I'm going to go to J school and get a master's and do this for a living. And, when I was in J school, they didn't really know what to do with somebody with extremism background. They just flat out they had no clue. I was like the only one, and they were kind of like, huh? And for my capstone, which is basically a thesis, I did basically what I did for Gavin McGinnis, but I did Tucker Carlson, OANN, and Nick Fuentes. And then I compared it to, I had a control, because this is more academic, with this NBC morning show called like Morning Now or something, and then PBS. And so I tracked them for 3 months, and I basically did a compare contrast of like what everybody was covering, and found a lot of overlap between Fuentes and Tucker Carlson, which was disturbing. And then basically that ended up being about COVID, because that's what it was kind of about. That was like the story that 3 months. And then somebody from my school sat me down and he said, oh my God, I love your capstone. I'm obsessed. And then like Jeff Jarvis, he's very well known in media.
Oh,
Jeff Jarvis.
Yep. I know Jeff.
He knows you. He mentioned you actually during the process. Yes, he did. He's a big fan. Yeah, and he sat me down. He sat me down and he goes, would you do this, but do it about Fox? And I'm like, okay, sure.
Yeah.
And then we sort of put it together and designed it together. I kind of over designed it because it's a lot of work. I like never stop working. But now I do 3 shows a day of Fox and then 1 PBS NewsHour. And then every single week I compare Fox to PBS. But the main focus is Fox. But PBS is sort of the control of like, this is how normal, nonpartisan news, high quality, reported on. And this is what Fox was talking about. Fox was talking about drag queens, it's like.
Right. And that's actually a really valuable part of your newsletter is the kind of the comparison with PBS. And then also I really appreciate the section that you have on what Fox isn't covering. Because
so long, it takes forever to do that.
Yeah. Well, and someone like myself who watches a lot of Fox as too, sometimes I kind of lose sight of things that aren't covered. And, one that came through in a recent newsletter that I thought was an interesting observation is how Fox covers, for instance, like inflation or macroeconomic problems as though any sort of issue of that sort is Biden's fault. There was some sort of unique policy choice that he made, or, he's inflicting pain. upon the American people. And then when you contrast that like with PBS, where they make sure to put things in kind of more of a global context, talk about COVID being, a factor with supply chain problems that contribute to inflation, things like that. And so, if you're just kind of immersed in Fox, you can kind of lose sight of these dimensions to stories that they just never bother mentioning because it's not helpful for the politics that they're trying to push.
Yeah, it's not part of their narrative. So they just don't. I mean, they flat out say, they've said, as you know, because you consume a lot of Fox too, is that they'll say, oh, the inflation was purposely caused by Biden and the Democrats to wreck the economy, to make us all go green and to change radically our society, and different versions of that.
Sure.
And meanwhile, you turn on PBS and they're like, the EU just raised interest rates because their inflation is 8.5%. Ours is 6%,
Right.
So it gives you more perspective, like, oh, this is global. This is all over the world. Whereas Fox just, oh, it's Biden, and it's like, that's just one of many examples of their incredibly warped coverage of just lying through omission, which is a big part of the network. And the other thing that's very funny, I should add, when I was in grad school, that you would get a kick out of, because it's you too. When I was in because I was a fan of your work way before I probably a couple of years before I got into grad school. But when I was in grad school, faculty and other students would say this to me a lot, which it just made me laugh. They'd go, "How do you do that? How do you watch Fox News?"
Well, Fox must be for you kind of like, light content compared to Gavin McGinnis or watching, kind of extremist programming. I mean, you made an interesting point earlier, which I think at this point has become maybe kind of obvious to people that, when you watch Tucker Carlson, there's a lot of overlap. And, in a lot of ways, Tucker is extremist TV more so than ever. And so, to act like there's a big distinction between, watching something that's even further right, Gavin McGinnis, though I don't think he has a show anymore. Correct me if I'm wrong there. But
he does he does on a really goofy network, his own network, that I think is very low rent, and it's just it's sad. He's basically trying to be compound media, but he doesn't have the following. Because he kind of, when he sold out the Proud Boys, he like quit the group in 2018 to save his own butt, and he still tried to hang on, but not really, because he didn't want to risk getting deported because he's not American. He's Canadian. He basically quit the group officially. And I don't think he's ever really recovered from that, because I think his followers kind of were like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like, really, dude? And he still tries to thread the needle of like, I founded the Proud Boys. I am the Proud Boys. But I'm not the leader. No. Because he just, he doesn't want to pay for he doesn't want to suffer the consequences. So
sure.
Oh, he's
on the Bill O'Reilly path of having a show that no one seems to be aware of, but he's still kind of out there.
Yeah, it's totally what he does. Like, he just interviewed Ye West for something stupid. Like, really, you're that desperate?
That's actually I'm sure that got some clicks, I would think.
Oh yeah, but it was just disgusting. It's like, oh look, I have the worst person on the planet. Let's interview him.
Yeah. So and you obviously spend a lot of time debunking the nonsense on Fox and, kind of explaining lies by omission and ways in which, if you're consuming this content earnestly, it would kind of warp you. But I'm curious, what do you see as, is your audience, I'm assuming it's mainly kind of people like me or other, lefties who want to understand Fox, but don't necessarily want to watch it or have the time and energy to watch it or the stomach for it like you do. But I'm curious, have you heard from any people who, at one time or another have actually been fans of Fox, who have told you, boy, this has really kind of opened my eyes to what's going on there. And, maybe you've kind of affected some change that way, in the sense that you're kind of pulling back the drapes a little bit on what Fox is for people who might not have understood it before encountering your work.
I have a far more diverse audience than I thought I was going to have. I have far more moderate Republicans and former Republicans and former fans of Fox News than I ever thought I would get. And they tell me, like, I used to follow Fox. Sometimes they'll unsubscribe, or they get mad because I'll post something like, I have a trans cousin and I've posted stuff in support of the trans community, and I've had a few people get really angry with me over that. and I don't know if they're former Republicans or not, but they were followers of mine who were like, how dare you, there's only two genders. And I just go, well, maybe if you had a relative or friend who went through this, you'd see it differently. I try to be chill about it, because I think people respond more to chill than militant, like, how dare you, if you're just very like, hey, calm down. It's okay, we can disagree, but trans people are human beings, please, don't go on these, don't say horrible things. But so, and I, who knows, maybe some of those, I shouldn't assume some of the people who've gotten mad at me over the trans stuff are Republican. They may have been Democrat. I don't know. I won't make any assumptions, but I do know that I have, based on the feedback I've gotten and the bios I've read about, like, from their Twitter handles and stuff, I have a fair amount of Republican followers, and a lot of them that follow the Bulwark as well follow me.
Yeah.
And I go out of my way to not push my own politics in my stuff. I will say stuff like, I think like trans LGBTQ, that's just a human rights issue for me. I don't think that is political. Like, just, they're human beings. People treat people like human beings, give them respect. They should not be harassed or anything like that. And you can definitely tell I'm like against racism, but like, I try not to be like,
sadly that's become
political.
That's become partisan these days. If you're against racism, you're
but like, I try not to push like, oh, like, this Democrat I don't like, this Democrat I love, and this, I try not to do that. I try to just keep my opinion out of it. I have opinions about various people in the political sphere, but I try to just not push it because I don't want to alienate people. I'd rather have them come to get the stuff on Fox and not be the Juliet Jeske political opinion show.
Well, and yesterday was kind of a scary day for a lot of that, because obviously the terrible shooting in Nashville, which we learned later was allegedly carried out by a trans woman. And so I tuned in, and I don't know if you had this experience yesterday. I know you were busy writing your newsletter, so I'm not sure how much time you had to actually watch Fox yesterday, but I was really dreading tuning in because over, especially I think the past couple years, and maybe you have thoughts on this too, it seems like transphobia has become a more and more central part of Fox's brand, and they kind of sanitize it, in the context of like concerns about women in sports or kind of like gender issues. Riley Gaines, who is a former college swimmer, has become a regular guest on a variety of shows, and she's, out there really kind of trying to raise awareness or kind of demagoguing, trans women competing in sports. There's even been the very grotesque spectacle of Caitlyn Jenner going on there to push transphobia. And so it's become a very kind of core part of their brand. And in the wake of this shooting, I was especially dreading Tucker Carlson to see what he would say. And I'm not sure if you noticed this as well, but I watched it. You did, I think, before we started recording, mention that you watched Jesse Waters yesterday, and his treatment was quite similar to Tucker Carlson's, where at the beginning of each of their respective shows, they had kind of a news update that ticked through the facts, of course, mentioned that the shooter is transgender, but then they kind of moved on to other issues. Now, Tucker at the end of his show was teasing heavily that he is going to make the shooting a big focus of tonight's show. So I don't want to get ahead of, or kind of say something that ends up aging poorly because of content, coverage that happens 12 hours later. But, so do you think that that's kind of, is that consistent with what you've noticed as well, that transphobia has become kind of a bigger part of Fox's brand? And, I guess you've already kind of talked about how you handle that in your newsletter, that you kind of view that as sort of a core human right. And hence, it's not something you can necessarily debunk other than to kind of insist that trans people are human. But your background having a trans relative, I think, is reflective of a lot of people's experiences. And unfortunately, with conservative politics in the States these days, so often Republicans need to have that sort of personal experience before they kind of come around to rationality. And I guess it's just unfortunate that more people don't have trans people in their lives like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Fox has done, which is really, truly sick, is they've decided that, okay, now we can't go after gay people, like lesbians and gay men. We can't go after gay people. So we're going to go after trans people. We'll demonize trans people. And then they weirdly roped in drag queens, which are performers, which have nothing to do. I mean, it's just technically anybody can be a drag queen. I live in New York City, where I know women who are drag queens who dress up in crazy costumes and don personas, and they go to drag shows and they perform at drag shows, but they're biological women. and not a ton of them. They tend to be queer, and
Yeah.
they, they're part of that spectrum, and they love it, and they're just performers. That's all it is. But they have decided that somehow the trans movement is about children, and they'll use terms like mutilation of children and castration of children, which that's not happening. It's sort of, I think the average age of gender reassignment surgery is 29.5. And so that's almost 30 years old. And there is, if you look up the data, there's some conflicting stuff, but most like surgery is almost never done on minors. And if it is, it's a teenager, and it's something that's it's usually not genital at all. It's something, it might be a mastectomy or not, but it's not very common. And Fox acts like every single child who identifies as trans at age 5 is going to the doctor the next day and getting radical surgery. That's just not what happens. So and what's interesting about my cousin is she's from a lower income in the middle of nowhere, Missouri. So the idea that, I think there's this perception too on Fox that trans is a trend and it's only coming out in the coast, and it's only rich people who like, look at my trans child, to be trendy, to be hip. And I'm like, wow, Erica, grew up in a trailer and had no money her whole life, and struggled and had a lot of difficulties her whole life. And it wasn't until she was an adult, like fairly late, decided that, hey, I finally figured this out. I'm trans. And since she came out and transitioned, she's had a much easier road. And that was the struggle she was dealing with her whole life. And she didn't know how to talk about it. She didn't know how to express it. And I can't even imagine what that would be like, because I'm a very boring cisgender woman who's straight, and I don't
sell yourself short.
It's just sort of like, I can't even fathom looking in the mirror and going, that's not right. What I see is not right. Or feeling trapped. I have no idea what that would be like, but that's what trans people have described it as, feeling trapped. And I'm like, wow. Yeah. So, and that, sorry, go ahead.
And well, no, and it's kind of a chicken and egg thing, I feel like, because, I think Fox is responsive to viewers. I think we definitely have seen that with how they've handled Trump. And, we've gotten a lot of information about this with the Dominion lawsuit and some of the texts that have come out that, a lot of these hosts didn't really believe some of the things that they were promoting on air in terms of the election lies and conspiracy theories. And I think there's, kind of a similar dynamic with the, I think you put it well with, it's more of a war on queerness than anything else, because it's not just trans people, it's also homosexuality and any sort of, any sort of LGBT identity is kind of under attack by Fox. And, I'm just not quite sure if that's, like an editorial decision that comes down from executives there, if it's more of an organic, so to speak, response to what they think that their viewers want to hear. But regardless, I think that, it permeates into elected officials in the Republican Party. And so I think it's incorrect to kind of view Fox as like this fringe bubble. It really does kind of promote talking points and policy positions that are at the core of Republican politics, which of course Republicans control the House right now. There's a good chance that a Republican returns to the White House in 2025. So it's not really this kind of fringe thing. And it is really kind of sad how much, a war on queerness has become kind of central to that brand of politics and that brand of media.
Well, PBS just had a story where they said 150 laws across the country that are directed at the trans community, anti-trans laws across 150. And that's staggering. And so that's, in some cases, those are states, some are cities, all these, anti-drag queens, anti-trans, anti-gender affirming care across the country. And I think it was just in Kentucky, the governor vetoed a law that would get rid of all gender affirming care, and that's including in adults. And the legislature is probably going to be able to override his veto. So it's Georgia just pass something. This is all from PBS last week. So
Yeah.
remember, I just
you
wrote
actually,
it last
you
week.
got good information from
Yeah.
them, not
So,
brain poison.
Yeah. So Georgia also just banned gender affirming care for most minors in most situations. And it's like they found a new wedge that they can go after in the culture war, and that's
Right.
trans people. And I just think it's very unfortunate because trans people are real human beings who are going to suffer because of this. They're not just a pawn for you to use to get your ratings up or to get people out to the polls. They're actual human beings that suffer because you've demonized them. And that's I find that one of the hardest things to cover sometimes when they go on their anti-LGBTQ rants.
Because it's also kind of gross I feel gross sharing that stuff. Sometimes it's newsworthy, if there's like an elected official who's saying these things on Fox, or if a host says something that's really egregious, I think it's worth highlighting. But I feel kind of bad sometimes having videos like that on my feed or in my newsletter.
Agreed. I have similar feelings. There's times where I don't clip something because I just get so like, and then I'll see somebody else who covers Fox clips it, and I'm like, maybe I should have clipped it. And I'm like, yeah, but I know I didn't, because I was just disgusted by it. I liked it. My favorite thing to do is like when Hannity will say something stupid like, we're not producing oil or gas anymore. And then I'll make a quick video that's like, actually, the United States is the #1 producer of crude oil in the world.
Sure.
Like, that's my favorite.
That's an easy one where it's kind of a clean shot, like, you're wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's no way that I'm not having to delve into Tucker Carlson saying something horrible or, or another one that does really well for me is my favorites are when Ducey goes rogue, which is when Steve Ducey says something nuts.
Sure.
And I'm
Fox
like,
and Friends.
Yeah, that doesn't happen very often, but he has a tendency. And people ask all the time, is that scripted or is he spontaneously doing that? I'm like, I have no idea, but he'll just be like, Trump's kind of crazy.
Yeah. Well, it's because I worked briefly for a television station in the Twin Cities that coincidentally is a Fox News affiliate. It's a local Fox station, but the newsroom at that, it's Fox 9 here in the Twin Cities, was not really particularly political at all. I mean, we had a Capitol reporter in St. Paul who would cover political stories, but never was it, kind of charged with, culture war stuff. It was just, TV news in a local market tends to be pretty anodyne, and it was there too. But that experience kind of taught me, like, I don't think that when Ducey goes rogue or when Brian Kilmeade, today, before we hopped in this call, Kilmeade was responding to Trump's interview with Hannity last night, which is kind of the big Fox news of the day, at least to me, was that Hannity gave Trump a platform for an hour, a whole segment of which was devoted to trashing Ron DeSantis with no pushback whatsoever. And DeSantis, of course, has been heavily promoted by Fox, including especially by Brian Kilmeade. And so Kilmeade was a little bit disappointed in disappointed in Trump urging him not to punch down on DeSantis and to instead focus on touting his accomplishments and drawing a contrast as if Trump, at this point is capable of changing. But I don't think that when Kilmeade says stuff like that, or when Ducey, on occasion has kind of defended vaccines, for instance, that this is like scripted or something that comes down from high. I just think that when you're doing 4 hours of television a day, especially in more of a talk show format, like your own views are going to seep through a little bit. But that is where, a lot of the intrigue with Fox, some of the most interesting clips come from when hosts kind of get off message and say something that in many cases is actually much more truthful in what they usually say, but kind of contradicts with the talking points that you usually hear on Fox. It's been those are my favorite moments, like, because it's sort of like they're breaking out of the matrix a little bit, instead of the usual same spin that they put on everything. So it's I like wait for those moments. I personally find Judge Jeanine hilarious, and some people don't quite get my appreciation for her eccentricity. It's like I don't agree with anything she says. It's just that she will occasionally throw a pen at Greg Gutfeld's head, and that's funny. Or she'll snap at somebody and just like, woo, well, yeah. This is actually I wanted to ask you about this, and so for people who kind of follow on casually, for a long time, Tucker Carlson had the top rated show on cable news, period. And correct me if I'm wrong, I don't see a lot of ratings talk in your newsletter, I guess, so maybe this isn't something that you cover extensively, but the 5 has surpassed Tucker in ratings now, right?
Yeah, the 5 is number one.
What do you think explains that? Because, like, full disclosure, my viewing habits with Fox these days are I have it kind of on in the background. And when I see like a Lindsey Graham or a Tom Cotton or Kevin McCarthy, that's when I really tune in and start listening and possibly clipping. But a lot of the stuff that's just hosts kind of riffing or monologues, I don't always watch that stuff because I have other things I have to do. And it's not really usually that newsworthy. It's just kind of the stuff that you would, when you watch enough Fox, you kind of know what to expect.
Yeah.
But and so that's basically what the five is. I mean, they never really have guests. It's five hosts bantering with each other, and yet it's been this rating smash at 5 p.m. Eastern. So what explains that? Why is this show such a smash hit?
I think it's a smash hit because it's really dumb. I mean, it's just easily it's like sad. Popcorn. It's popcorn. It's, if you think about it, it's like who's watching television at 5 p.m. People who are retired for the most part, or people who don't have a traditional job. And so you've got a lot of the entire cable news audience skews older. So you're talking about people in their senior years who probably aren't working anymore, who turn on TV and they get to sit around and see their five friends chat. And I think that there's a stupidity to the five that is inviting. They have sections, like they'll do 3 news stories, usually the A block, the B block, the C block, and then sometimes they'll do a 4th. And then they go into just completely stupid stuff where they'll be like, they have a section called The Fastest, and where it's just 2 quick stories. Sometimes it's only 1, or sometimes it's 3, whatever. And there'll be stuff like emojis at work. Huh? Let's talk about emojis. Yeah. Let's talk about junk drawers. Let's talk about haircuts, and you're like, shut up. And I'm sitting here going, stop it. I hate my life. But when I got my grant, the shows that I was asked to do by Jeff Jarvis and were Fox and Friends, The Five, and then I basically said, well, let's do a different primetime show. And so I was in like rotation, and I usually go by order. I go Jesse Waters, Tucker, Hannity, Ingram. I don't do Gutfeld because it's not really a news show. Yeah. So it's just not. I watched.
Well, the ratings for that are great too. Like that blows my mind. It is really not funny at all. But
some of that is a little it's a little misleading. He and the West Coast, apparently he's on like 8 o'clock at night. So to call him a late night show is a bit ridiculous. Yeah. Somebody from LA pointed that out to me, and I was like, "No way, really?" And they're like, "Yeah, he's on like super early."
Yeah.
So to compare him with Colbert and stuff doesn't really make a ton of sense. He's not actually competing with them. Yeah. But Fox, and he's the only conservative on who's doing a quote unquote comedy show. I watched 1 episode and went, absolutely not. I'm not watching that again. That's not a news program. It's just him like telling bad jokes and people talking. It's horrible. It's kind of like The Five, though. It's a panel. It's 4 people. Like, we're going to talk about nothing.
Right.
But no, The Five is just, it's like candy. And I think that's why people like it. And it's also, they were smart in programming it. I talked to a reporter who's a bit older than me, who has more experience in the whole realm. And he said it's a very well programmed show in that they picked kind of the right personalities for that show. So you've got Judge Janine, who's like completely unpredictable, and she'll just go off. And then you've got Jesse Waters.
Gutfeld's on there. And
Gutfeld will say anything. He often says horrible things.
Do they still have the token liberal on there?
Yeah, they do. And
is it Jessica?
They move them around. They have a rotation. Jessica's the only decent one. Geraldo Rivera will sometimes get a few zingers in that I'm like, he shocks me, that I'm like, wow, there's still something there, Geraldo, rather than just, oh yeah, you guys are right. Okay, I just want to get along with everybody. That's usually Geraldo. And then they have Harold Ford Jr. on, who I would call just a moderate. He's not even a liberal, because he's like, I think we should build a wall and that George W. Bush was a great president.
Right.
How the hell are you a liberal?
Which is like, that's like an endangered species. The George W. Bush Republican is not.
Yeah, he's like, and he calls himself a Democrat. I'm like, that's funny. But he said, I like Trump. And I'm like, what? Who are you? But Tarloff is the only like really feisty, well-informed. They also have a guy named Fowler on. He's not on very often. And he was just on last week, and Gutfeld chewed him out because he didn't like how he was pronouncing certain words. And I thought to myself, that's interesting, Gutfeld, because you've had Megan McDowell on there, and she's got a very, very thick Southern accent. I've never seen you do that to her. But a black man, Richard Fowler, you'll correct how he pronounces words. Really, that's very interesting. Gutfeld, piece of garbage. Anyway.
Well, I think you nailed it where, we think of CNN or MSNBC, and it's like being smart is the goal, right? You want to be informative, you want to be smart, you want to be compelling, but the whole secret of the five is the opposite. It's being dumb. It's being kind of reactionary.
Just emotionally reacting. Emotionally reacting to something. Oh my God, this is crazy what they're like. I do a Judge Janine and my Judge Janine.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
I'm sorry for the audio. I'm going to just say that now. I'm probably blowing it out. I'll try to back off the mic a bit. But Judge Janine, I don't know how her audio people even survive a given day. And because she just she'll just throw stuff and just shut up. And that's how I see it. And talk about emotionally reacting. Woo. And then Jesse Waters is like, I have joked before, like, I don't know how he functions because he says stuff that's so profoundly stupid that I'm like, I can't even handle it. Like, dumb. Oh my God, that man.
And that's, and the amazing thing is that, yes, he's painfully dumb, but you tune into his show on a given day. I believe yesterday he had Kevin McCarthy on there.
Yeah.
So it's like, does Kevin McCarthy, he must enjoy his show, right? It's not like he doesn't know what's going on this show. And so, a lot of these Republicans are kind of endorsing this stuff by appearing on shows like that, which I always find to be kind of fascinating, because if you watch the shows, you would think you wouldn't want to be associated with this stuff, but there they are.
They don't care. And what's interesting about Waters, I don't like, okay, so when Tucker does his show, he'll bleed into Hannity, and at the end of his show he like chats with Hannity for a bit. When Hannity ends his show, he chats with Ingram a little bit live. They'll be like, hey, how you doing, I love you, you're fabulous, joke about their outfits, whatever. Nobody does that with Waters. Is just, he does his show, he jokes for the show before his with Brett Baer, and then it's just Tucker. There's no overlap.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I think there's a reason, because I don't think the other three kind of respect him. That's my gut feeling. The other three have been around a lot longer. And
but we learned from the Dominion text did not really feature Jesse Waters at all, right? So he's not really he's not in the group text with all these other, Ingram
and he only recently got a primetime show. So it could also be that the Dominion stuff is going further back.
Yeah.
And not getting him when he had a primetime show. But I don't think he chats with those other three. I think those three chat with each other all the time, but I think he's sort of the newcomer who's not really up to their, because he does well in the ratings.
Yeah, his ratings are strong.
He's also at 7. So I think Fox viewers, they've done studies. Fox viewers will keep the network on all day long.
They
won't change the channel, which is like, what? Whereas a consumer of MSNBC or CNN will watch one show and then move on. Or a Fox viewer will keep the network on the entire day. They'll watch anything.
And they were worried a couple of years ago about Newsmax cutting into their audience, and of course that's a big theme of the Dominion, the text messages that have been surfaced as a result of this Dominion lawsuit. But they've really fended that off. I still end up watching some Newsmax just because they do pull pretty big guests on there. You'll get Kevin McCarthy. You'll get all the same people who go on Fox who will occasionally go on Newsmax. And so a lot of the news happens during those interviews, at least the stuff that I'm trying to monitor. But it's not like Fox really has much to worry about from competitors who are further right, like Newsmax or OAN at this point, even though Newsmax is back on DirecTV now. One other thing I just want to mention, I do want to get to some Trump stuff before we wrap, but I don't know if you've noticed, I find it quite humorous that Hannity now has a studio audience for his show, which, like, of all of the shows that would not really be suitable for a studio audience is his show, because it's not like he is funny. It's just kind of like him ranting and raving and then, interviewing Republicans, but he's got a studio audience there and they applaud at the end of his segments. And I can't imagine traveling to New York and spending your trip going to Hannity's studio for his show. But I don't know. I guess he must be he's doing something right, I guess. So
he's falling in the ratings significantly compared to Tucker and the 5 and even Jesse Waters. So, and he's the highest paid person on Fox News. So Hannity is probably panicking a little bit, and that's why they've tried to mix up his format. And his, out of all of the network shows, the primetime shows, he's the one that I'm like, all the time that I'm like, stay awake. Because he's just
it's the same show over and over again. Yeah.
Same guest. For reaction, we have Joe Concha. And I'm like, and Joe Concha will just say, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I'll be like,
I mean, I tuned in last night for the Trump interview just because I think it was the first time he's been interviewed on Fox.
Oh, probably
maybe since January 6th. Did he have one after that?
No, he had one. He was down in Mar-a-Lago. I did a sniff edit of it.
Okay.
It was a 2-parter and it was on Hannity.
Okay.
And it was, I don't remember when it was, but I think it was like this summer or something. I think it was after it was probably this fall. It was a 2-part interview, a Wednesday and a Thursday. It was down at Mar-a-Lago. It was Hannity interviewing him, and they were talking about the Mar-a-Lago search.
Oh, okay.
And I did a 2-part condensed. What I do is I take the whole hour and I bring it down to like 2 minutes or a minute and a half. That's like one of my favorite things to do, even though it's incredibly tedious and time consuming. But I love condensing the stuff because it's like, now you don't have to watch, like my annotated, they're similar in that my annotated though are my new favorite thing because I take Trump's voice out of it almost completely.
Yeah. I saw a lot of people commenting. I do want to ask you about that as well. The annotated rally video that you did, but yeah, that's a valuable service to take his voice out.
Because I my thing is, sometimes you get people who
don't want to hear it. Yeah.
And I'm sure you deal with this too, is the bigger the following you get, you just get kind of crazy feedback from every direction and you just have to kind of like ignore it. But a couple of people were like, oh, you're elevating him. I said, actually, I took an hour and a half long speech. I condensed it down to less than 2 minutes or less than 2 minutes. He speaks for a few seconds in it. And I just tell the audience exactly what happened in the speech in a very dry, monotone, sarcastic way. I had no emotion. I'm not all worked up. And I just say 20%. He said, poor me. 16%. He talked about, promises, or, he bragged about things he didn't actually do. 8%. He talked about promises that he would keep, stuff like that. And it's a way of showing people, okay, this is what happened in the speech, but you don't have to watch it. And we're certainly not going to keep those clips on a loop. I think the problem with elevating him would be show the entire hour and a half long video speech and then do 2 hours of commentary on it.
Well, also with no fact checking, as long as you're fact checking and kind of contextualizing stuff. I mean, the reality is that he's the Republican presidential frontrunner. So this whole talk about elevating, I think, kind of misses the point that, it's not an elevation problem. It's the problem that, about 40% of Americans seem to support this guy. And whether or not, this idea that if you just pretend it's not happening, it'll go away, or that's the secret is just not giving him oxygen. I think we're kind of past that point. I mean, the one thing with if it's, kind of this fringe figure that you are, kind of pumping to your followers, hey, watch this, or, there's different ways of amplifying something. And when you're doing it in the way that you do with a lot of fact checks and context, I think that hopefully people can understand that that's not an endorsement. If anything, you're trying to pick it apart usually. So.
Well, and it's also one of those things where you can't make everybody happy. It's like, I didn't really notice how, I knew this was going to happen, but it was like interesting to feel it when you hit, like, I'm at almost 80,000 followers right now. You have much bigger following than me. But when I hit about 50,000 is just the general noise that you get in feedback, and it's all conflicting. And so you cannot listen to it. You can't go, thank you for that note. Thank you for that note, because they don't necessarily line up and they're actually they're conflicting. So you just have to mute or ignore and move on. I mute so many people because it's like,
especially these days with the paid verified.
Because I get people who you get it from all sides. You get like the MAGA people are like, I hate you, you're an idiot, and they'll personally attack you. And then the left-wing people will be like, you're not coming at them hard enough, or you're elevating them, or you're advertising for them, and they'll come at you. And then you look at their feed and they're not making anything themselves. They're just criticizing other people, and you're like, yay. And so like, there's always people you're going to upset. So it's just like, whatever. You have to go, well, where am I getting, like, and it's funny because I always check. We know, because when you're on Twitter all day long or anything online, you can see how things perform. And that's how you can sort of gauge of like what works and what's not working, what's connecting, what's not connecting. Like anything about COVID-19 at this point, it just doesn't get enough. People are so tired of it.
Don't want to talk about it.
They're just so tired of it.
Exhaustion.
And I get it. But it's like, COVID-19 doesn't perform well, even if it's like people really need to see it. So you sort of have to be like judicious about like what you try to highlight,
Yeah.
because if you do everything, people are they just tune it out, because that's a topic that people are just so tired of. Whereas other things like, like Kat over at over at Media Matters, Kat and I could probably do a 4-hour montage of Tucker Carlson just being creepy.
Oh yeah.
Like, I could do that all day of him just saying like, I could spank it.
Yeah.
Like, lock me up, put chains on me and spank me. And you're like, dude, it's so obvious. There's some deep issues going on here. Like the weird sexual BDSM comments that he just throws out there, and you're like, what are you doing?
There's a little bit of an incel flavor to his show, and I think that's part of the appeal with his viewers. But hey, we just got a couple minutes left, and I do want to get to, just briefly before we're done, the Trump Waco rally, which we've talked about a couple times.
Yeah.
You did a annotated video kind of breaking down, which you've already detailed a little bit, the percentage of time he spent talking about various things. One interesting factoid that I did not realize until I saw your video is that Trump actually spent more time attacking DeSantis than he did Biden. Which, it's a Republican primary, so he obviously has to beat DeSantis to get to Biden. And so I guess there's a certain logic to that. But I don't know how many Trump rallies you've watched. I mean, I've watched pretty much all of them, but just kind of interested for your big picture takeaways. I thought the content of his speech was pretty meh. There wasn't a whole lot new. The location I thought was more the message, having it in Waco near the 30th anniversary of the FBI standoff there. There was some heavy symbolism involved in that was pretty grim. But what were your kind of 30,000 foot takeaways from the Trump speech?
The creepy QAnon music, which I forgot to put in the annotation version because it was sort of like one layer. He had the creepy QAnon music going on for a minute,
and that's been a normal part of his speeches now.
Yeah. And then I think also the you are right. He spent a lot more time ripping on DeSantis, and that went up measurably from the last rally that he held. He mentioned DeSantis a couple, for like 2% of his last rally, and then Waco went up to 6%. And the way I judge that is I basically just like probably about every half minute to a minute and a half is usually how long he'll stick on a topic, and they'll cut and keep moving. Sometimes he'll go on for like 3 minutes, which is rare, but he'll just be like, that sanctimonious DeSantis, that bad guy, blah, 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 blah. And I'm just like, wait. And then we change his topic. I cut, and then I just see how long that was. I'm like, okay, that was a minute and a half. And so he barely ever talks about Biden. He'll complain about, the United States, like, oh, everything's horrible, everything's terrible, everything's horrible. And then very rarely would he actually say his name. He doesn't really say his name very often. And he'll say, oh, this Joe Biden. But it's almost like he thinks it's 2016 and he's doing the same exact campaign speech a little bit. He mentioned Hillary 9 times in the last one.
Well, there wasn't a lock her up chance. I was waiting for that, just the thick irony. The irony of that, but it didn't happen. Yeah, his fans have, I guess, kind of moved on, because there was a time where if Hillary's name was so much as mentioned at a Trump rally. Yeah.
Lock her up for emails that didn't even exist.
Well, and one quick parting question here is that I watched it kind of late at night. I watched the entire thing, but the spin on Fox the last couple days has been that the crowd was quiet while Trump was attacking DeSantis, and kind of the subtext being, this isn't really a big hit with the fans. Maybe rethink doing this, Donald Trump. Did you notice that? I mean, I didn't notice that. I saw Fox kind of framing it this way, and I was like, really? Because it seemed like that was just kind of a normal part of his speech. It's not like people were going nuts. Yeah, but I don't get the sense that his fans are like upset that he's attacking DeSantis at all.
I didn't really get that. I mean, they weren't. When they're worked up, they'll do the USA, or they'll just start cheering his name or whatever. I didn't notice them really. They treated the DeSantis section like any other section. I didn't see people getting quiet or any sort of tension. That's
been on multiple Fox shows yesterday.
No,
their presentation was, the crowd was quiet while Trump was attacking DeSantis. No. And
they are just desperate to keep pushing DeSantis. My podcast that I'm about to record is Ron versus Don, because last week, that's the trend I saw. I'm not even covering anything else, because to me, it just took over the whole network. It was just Ron versus Don, and it was just like I go through the whole week, Monday through Friday, and show examples of them pushing one or the other, and how kind of schizophrenic the network is. They cannot figure it out. They really want to push Ron.
Yeah.
That's what my gut feeling is. They really want to push Ron.
Yeah.
But they will pivot on a dime if they think it'll save them, keep the ratings up, keep the money flowing.
And a lot of commentators, want to kind of talk about Fox like it's one thing, and it's really not. It depends, as you were saying, it depends if you're listening to Brian Kilmeade or Sean Hannity, and so if you watch Hannity, you're going to think that they're still all in on Trump. And if you watch Kilmeade, you're going to think that they're pushing DeSantis. And so my sense is that there's some latitude. Hosts can kind of do what they see fit at this point, as long as it's, within they're not going to obviously be promoting Biden. But if Trump ends up being the nominee, I think they will quite clearly rally around him again, and it'll become Trump propaganda TV again. But we got to leave it there. I'll have you back on in the future. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of news surrounding Fox as the primary heats up. But Juliet, thanks a lot for joining me. Everybody check out her work at Decoding Fox News. And I really appreciate you spending some time on this Tuesday morning with me.
Thank you.
Oh, and what's your kitty cat's name?
That's Thor. That's
Thor.
He's little, but he's the most destructive one. He breaks everything.
Thor, thank you for making a guest appearance. I'm looking around to see if there's a baby nearby that I can. I think one's at daycare, one's napping. So
your babies are so cute.
Oh, thank you. Well, that's a good, after all of this dark stuff we've talked about, that's a good note to end it on. So thanks again, Juliet. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
That does it for today's episode of the Aaron Rupar Show. Please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, and also follow me on YouTube to watch the footage of the show each week. You can find me there at the Aaron Rupar Show. New episodes drop every Wednesday, so be sure to check out your feeds each week for a new installment of the show. And thanks for listening.